Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar for today. It's called Rot Remediation, File Share Cleanup, and How to Do It Right. If you are new to Valora, we often host this is our annual webinar series. So this is the first in a series of 7 webinars we're going through this year. You are here at February 12th. Throughout the year, we're going to cover a variety of topics that are really top of mind for the information governance industry right now, talking a lot about data privacy, talking about info governance, role in AI and how businesses can apply AI and auto-classification to their data in a variety of ways. So if you haven't checked it out, I would welcome you to go check out our sparkly brand new website at valoratech.com, and you can register for those webinars there. And you can also see all of our past webinars as well. If there's topics that you may be interested in, do a bit of a search there in resources, and there's a ton of stuff there to go through. So as a bit of an introduction for us, my name is Jen Nelson. I'm the VP Strategic Solutions here at Valora, and joining me is Sandy Surkees, who is co-founder and CEO. It's great to have you with us today, and again, welcome. If you are new to Valora, if you haven't heard of us before, we are celebrating 25 years in business this year, and which is pretty exciting for us. And it's really neat to see over the past 25 years how the maturity and the sophistication of the industry, how much that has changed, and we have evolved with it. So what we offer today is a very comprehensive end-to-end information governance platform that leverages auto-classification technology and machine learning to help automate the discovery, the identification, the classification, and the disposition of content, regardless of where it lives across the enterprise. And most folks who are users of Valora are data governance teams, records management teams, some IT, compliance, legal teams. And what it allows us to do is bring kind of multiple enterprise repositories up into a single view, which is very helpful. But not only do we help bring those repositories into a single view, but we help bring multiple use cases in an organization together. Because it used to be that information governance was kind of synonymous with records management, which was like, find the corporate record, preserve it for as long as it should, destroy it appropriately. But we really know as an industry that has evolved significantly. And we know that all corporate data really has that life cycle that needs to be managed and accounted for appropriately, while accounting for things like data privacy obligations and the ability to respond to a data subject request if you need to, the ability to put things and respect legal holds, other regulatory compliance obligations, and of course, 2025 and 2024 is the year of AI. So making sure that and having the ability and a way to ensure that your data is ready and clean for any AI engines. And ultimately, this is kind of the power play that Valora brings to the table, is kind of unifying all these different use cases into a single pane of glass platform. So that's our short infomercial on kind of, who we are and what we do. Let's have a little look at who you guys are, because with the registration, I did ask a few poll questions. So kind of who's here today, and what are your interests or concerns? And for the folks who registered, the majority of folks were RIM professionals, which is great to see. Funny to see nobody from IT. So we might pick on them a little bit today, but a lot of folks had kind of parallel roles, working in records and information management, also compliance, also dabbling in security and KM. So it was really neat to see kind of that breadth of professionals. So welcome. And what is keeping you up at night right now? A majority was saying filing cleanup and rot reduction. So you are in good company. You've come to the right place. But also, again, we know that records kind of has that broad umbrella or spectrum of things we're responsible for. So it's also dark data. Oh my God, I don't know where anything is. I need to automate my manual processes, and managing those retention policies. And of course, the big one at the end, the OMG, everything, man, just everything. So so we are going to be focusing on rot today, but we welcome this, and I'm thank you very much for sharing kind of what your challenges are. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get in. If you've never been to a Valora webinar before, again, welcome. But Sandy and I are very open and we kind of flip things back and forth. And we don't have any problem interrupting the other. So if you have questions as we go, I would encourage you to chat, put them in the chat. I think there's a Q&A. I can't see it on this screen. I have to look over here, but there's a Q&A box. So I would encourage you to. You got it? Okay. Sandy's on it. So if you do have questions as we go, please feel free to enter them in the chat and we'll answer them as we go, or we'll wait to the end because we will have a period at the end to answer some questions. And after the fact, we'll send you the recording, we'll send you the slides, and we'd love your feedback too. If there's things that you'd like to see in a future webinar or any questions that you have, we are so open to it. So we appreciate that. Okay, let's get into it. Our agenda today, we've got a lot to cover, actually, just talking about plain old rot. We're going to talk about file shares and what the heck are we still doing talking about file shares? So we're going to talk about rot and how did it all get there. We're going to talk an impact of rot from a cost, a risk, compliance, and also an effort standpoint. We're going to have a little discussion about why deleting content is so hard for people to wrap their heads around and wrap their arms around actually pressing the delete button and getting rid of stuff. We're going to talk about identifying and remediating rot the right way and some gotchas and trip ups that you can look for and avoid as you're doing this. And watch for this little ghostio because we're going to kind of touch on real world stories as we go through. So real world examples of some of the clients that we've seen and the challenges that they faced. And Sandy and I we're very thankful that we sit in this position because as practitioners are sitting in your business and, you are kind of organizing and managing your information governance programs, we have the very interesting vantage point of looking into very many different industries with very many levels, years in business, sophistication and maturity of their information governance program. So we've kind of seen it all. So we've got these little scary ghostios to little gotchas of what we've seen and what we've heard from clients in the past. So Sandy, I'm going to hand this over to you. So we'll talk about our rot.
Okay, and Jen, I can't see the little notes that we took, so if I've missed anything, you chime in.
Okay.
So just in case there's somebody on this call that does not know the acronym ROT, we thought we'd spend 2 minutes on that. It stands for redundant, obsolete, or trivial. It's basically an industry acronym for junk that is lying around in file shares and everywhere else. So just a little bit more definition. When we say redundant, generally that means duplicative information. I have the exact same thing, file 16 times in different places. We have obsolete. Everyone knows that as past retention. We shouldn't have this anymore. Why haven't we gotten rid of it? Trivial is kind of a whole bucket on its own of basically junk stuff. Things that have low value. And I would personally like to introduce a fourth topic to rot. I don't know whether we want to call it roti or riot or roit, but I would like to introduce an I, and the I is for inappropriate, which is content that we have that is, let's say, compromising, inappropriate, potentially dangerous, potentially gotten not under the best circumstances. That's not rot per the strict definition, but it probably is something you should get rid of quick. So I lump it in. Personally, I like to say roti, but use whatever acronym you like.
I love it.
Okay, so I mentioned duplicates. Many people just simply equate rot analysis with dupes, meaning identical dupes. And yes, identical dupes tend to make up a large portion of the rot pie, but they're not the only form of rot, and they're not even the only form of duplicates. So when we say an identical duplicate, what we mean is a forensically identical, a clone. If I send the same file today to all of you on this webinar, each version of that you received is the same file. Those are identical duplicates or exact duplicates. If we run a hash code matching algorithm, they will match identical dupes like a fingerprint. The next category down, which is almost identical, but not technically so, are functional duplicates. So functional duplicates may look and feel like identical duplicates, but they fail the hash match. In other words, the fingerprint match doesn't match. So the most common version of a functional duplicate, is that our next slide, Jen?
It is, yeah.
Maybe we can jump there and then come back for near dupes. So the most common version of a functional duplicate is when someone saves a file in a different format. So you have a Word file, you save it as a PDF. Because of those differences in saving, they are not going to hash match. And here's an example. This is an actual file that we had as a Word file that we saved as a PDF. And you can see the size is different, the name is different, and the hash will be different, even though the contents are identical. And all of the tagging that we would apply to each of these documents would be the same, save for the path location, right? This one's over here, this one's over there. But other than that, they are functionally identical based on content. That's what we mean by functionally identical duplicates. For shorthand, you might call them 99%ers. And then the third bucket are what we call near duplicates. These are files that are similar, but definitely not what you'd consider to be a duplicate. They're near. So something like a form letter. If we send out a form letter to all employees, to all customers, the content of the letter is the same, but the recipient address at the top of the letter is different. One, Dear Susan, Dear Jane. That is the only material change. That's a good example of a near duplicate. And the reason that we talk about these different types of dupes and being rot is because certainly in the case of exact duplicates, maybe you don't need to keep 57 copies of this one file. Maybe one will suffice, and we'll get into this later, perhaps with 50, did I say 57? So one keeper and 56 tombstones or pointers to the original. In a functional dupe, maybe you want to treat them as a group, what we call a dupe group. Maybe you don't. Same with the near dupes. If one of those, 10,000 form letters is now past retention, are the rest of them as well? Can we knock them out with one fell swoop? So that's why we want to kind of organize duplication and affiliated content like that.
Yeah. And I'll just add here, Sandy, usually it depends on what kind of industry study you read, but it's usually between 30 and 50% of an enterprise data store is usually rot. We did have an example of where just identical duplicates were 40% of their data store that they were scanning, which was surprising and alarming.
I would say amongst Valora customers, the number's actually a little higher than that. I don't know if those are the ones that really need our help. Usually closer to 50% rot rate, just so everybody knows. So Jen puts this question out. Why are we still talking about Windows file shares in 2025? She did some interesting research that file shares came out in 1996. That's 29 years of data stored away in these file shares. Coincidentally, my age. No, I'm kidding.
I don't believe it. It was not 29 years ago.
Trying to start Valora when we were 4. Yes. And they're still very much in use. We've become accustomed. Most of us working today kind of came of age and grew up with file shares being the standard. The problem is they weren't ever particularly well managed. They don't have good structure. They don't have the ability to utilize metadata. The best we could do was clever foldering. And what you thought was clever 6 years ago, you've now forgotten the schema for, or that person has left the company. And so we basically have, you called it willy-nilly, I call it hodgepodge of content sort of strewn throughout file shares. as kind of another ghost story that's not listed there, we have one client that recently found a file share that had been basically not used for the last 15 years. Nobody has any idea what's on it. And this is surprisingly common. So we are very much still talking about file shares because they are very much still part of our lives. Now, to be fair, we are trying to get off the file share bandwagon. We're trying to get into SharePoint and other more kind of structured techniques for managing this content, but we have certainly not arrived at that destination just yet. Jen, I don't know if I've missed anything from our notes on that.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. So I get asked this a lot. So, if you had to guess, Sandy, how much rot are we probably facing? And what's the big whoop if we have some rot around? Turns out, yes, you have rot. If you're on this call, you have it. You have it. And I don't have to tell all of you. What we have to do is work together and tell everybody else in your organization that, yes, you have rot. And why is that so impactful? What is the problem with keeping it around? Particularly since until relatively recently, the kind of prevailing wisdom was just keep it. You never know, we might need it. Maybe it's part of legal hold, maybe this, maybe that. Just keep it, kind of we'll sort it out in a future generation. Well, that generation has arrived because there are incredible costs and impacts for keeping this rot around. The one that most people will think of right off the bat, and it certainly is very in your face, is the storage costs for that rot. The more we bring that onto the cloud, the more we're paying for that month after month. And we do have some metrics about the cost of that. But for a large scale organization, that's going to be like kind of a minimum of $5 million, $10 million annually just to store useless information, rot. I'm not talking about your total bill. I'm talking about just the rot portion. Mm-hmm. So just looking at data storage alone is a really good technique for setting yourself up for an ROI if you are trying to get buy-in to undertake a rot remediation effort. Focus on data storage costs because you're going to make an immediate bottom line impact there. There are, however, other places of impact. You finish this sentence, which is, if you keep it, then blank. And so if you keep it, then it's discoverable on your next litigation matter. If you keep it, then it's an available attack vector for your next breach. Note, I'm not saying if you get breached, I'm saying your next breach, because eventually it is going to happen if it hasn't happened already. So it's kind of like, I don't know if people remember the joke from Stephen Wright, a comedian. He would say, it's a small world, but I wouldn't want to paint it. That's the same kind of thing here. It's a small amount of data, but boy, I don't want to be responsible for that breach notification or for that document review in an e-discovery matter. So those are some both kind of risk factors and built-in cost factors for having to respond to those situations. And then, I'm sorry, Jen, I had one more.
Oh, sorry.
And then we get into the data privacy questions, which is the regulation has caught up to us to say, you're not supposed to have that anymore. That person opted out. That person has a right to be forgotten. You have concluded transactions with that person. That employee is no longer in your organization. You cannot keep that information. So now we have another force acting on what is the big deal? What's the impact of just kind of leaving this around? And then our new one, which is AI readiness, because the rot is the junk. It's the stuff that's obsolete. It's trivial. It's garbage. That is not what you want the AI engine running on in your organization. That is precisely the wrong data that you would want to prevent from getting into your AI engine. So the only way you can do that is to identify that it exists and where it exists so that you can route the AI away from the kind of offending content if you have to maintain it for some reason. Okay, Jen. Okay, So I kind of covered a lot of these. These numbers, if you're interested, we have all kinds of calculations and sources and things on where this stuff comes from. But you can calculate the actual data storage costs. You can calculate the productivity lost in people attempting to find something and not being able to find it because all this rot is cluttering up their lives. And that's a combination of the slowness and the difficulty to find what they're looking for, as well as people essentially just giving up and recreating the content that is probably out there. Now they're just compounding it for the next time. And then, of course, risk and exposure, we've already just kind of hit those. So, yeah. I don't know how many little ghosties you have on here.
Just 2.
Okay. But basically, if you keep it and you really shouldn't, you are at risk. Let's just leave it there. Which particular risk? Do you want to die by stabbing or poison? It's all the risks kind of all the time.
Yeah, totally. And if that hasn't convinced you that you need to get rid of your rot, is this you or someone in your organization why are people so reluctant to part with their data, even though they know that it is redundant, obsolete, and trivial? And these are some of the reasons that may come up. And as you are trying to gently explain to the people in your organization why it's a risk and why we should get rid of it, some people believe it's just that perception of value. Even though it's old, we may need it. We may need it in the future, so we should keep it. Or lack of ownership. Our friend who had nobody had touched anything in 20 years. It's like, well, we don't really know who owns it. So, we don't really want to delete it because we don't really know what's in there. And we don't know if we're going to need it again. So that's also a hesitation. The save everything mindset, which, was all right, maybe 15, 20 years ago. But of course, with compliance and different regulations, it is non-negotiable now. We cannot save everything, again, because of those risks. And some people have regulatory concerns and maybe misunderstanding or misreading what the data residency or the data storage obligations are for certain types of material so we're over retaining some of that PII that should be kind of pushed out of our data stores. And of course, fear of change. People don't like change. I've been doing it this way since I got here. And, I don't want to change my workflow. I don't want to change my processes. I don't want to change where I save my stuff or go to look for my stuff. So those are real. They're people problems. This just has nothing to do with technology. It really does have to do with the people in an organization and the employees. You want to make sure that people are, operating efficiently, and also you're not pissing them off by moving everything, deleting everything where they've kind of got a flow going. And we were chatting with a client that she's approaching it as a shift in thinking and a shift in behavior about how people should think about and deal with rot. And she likened it to a printer. She said, remember when everybody printed everything? Like you got an email, you printed it. Didn't even think it, you just printed it. You had a document you wanted to read. Well, you would never dream of reading it on your screen. You would print it and read it. Or a document, you would sign it, you print it and you'd sign it. And, 15, 20 years ago, her message to the company was, when you print it, you are creating work for me. Like, it now exists in another format. I have to manage it. I have to account for it. I have to figure out, how do I get my hands on it and destroy it when the appropriate time comes. So she was really taking it from this kind of shift in thinking and behavior to try to get her employees, on board with it's okay to delete things. And it's okay because there's other ways that we can do this, because we don't really need to bring our rot with us and store it for any longer than we have to. But IT will say, but storage is so cheap. And chatting with another one of our lovely clients, she likened it to trying to explain to her IT team, when you're at home and your fridge is messy, you got to clean out the fridge. I need to make a grilled cheese. I can't find the cheese. I don't know if this cheese is expired or this cheese is expired. Now, if the IT team was your roommate, they say, no problem. I'll get you another fridge. You can have a second fridge. We got lots of fridges. Fridges are so cheap. She's like, actually, I don't need additional storage for my fridge. I just need to go in and figure out what's in there, get rid of all the stuff that is expired, and then keep the things that have value to us in the kitchen, and in our business. Keep the good stuff and organize it. So next time you're going to make your grilled cheese, you know where the cheese is and you are confident that it's not expired. So those are some interesting ways about how folks are trying to educate and bring people on board with it's okay to get rid of stuff. And humans, the human factor is humans just can't keep up now with storage. We're talking about file shares. It's just one little place where our data is living, right? In an enterprise. And so with our, I've also heard, well, that's why we hired you. You're gonna look for the rot and get rid of it and stuff. But humans can't do it. Just humans can't do it. Of course, there's human error. There's inconsistencies, what I would consider old just by looking at it, or what's a corporate record? I have no idea. And what Sandy would consider rot, maybe two different things. And it's not my job. If I'm in accounting, I'm not worrying about rot. I'm not worrying about data. I'm not worrying about where things are stored or how long they're stored for. So there's that kind of that human, get your backup perception that is really real. And of course, scalability issues. One human or a team of humans cannot possibly classify and sort through and find the dupes through all of these systems. And of course, compliance risk. There absolutely is a non-compliance risk here when you don't know. And then there's also limited auditability. So when you're using a tool or some kind of technology, you can see that audit trail. But when you're asking humans to do it and have a human make that decision, you really have that lack of transparency where you don't really know why things were categorized in a certain way. And then, of course, that big box there it's time consuming and it's costly. And it's really costly. And I was like, we always say that. Dude, well, it's time and money and cost and effort. But I was like, actually, how much would that cost? Dear friends, I did the math. So let me walk you through this for a second. So we were thinking, if we had a team of humans to do this, what would it cost? So we estimated that it would take one employee 30 seconds on average to manually classify. Open it, figure out what it is, check it against the records retention schedule and classify it. So if we did the math, if we had 1 million documents, it would take 30 million seconds to do it, approximately 3.8 employee years. So one employee in a work year, we're not working 24 hours, it would take about 264,000 documents in a year. Cool, to manually do it. An average employee in a business receives maybe 100 emails a day, maybe works on 10 documents. That's probably conservative, but we were looking for a number. And in an average 1,000-person organization, so that means each day the organization is producing 110,000 documents a day or 1.3 million documents a year. Let's say that business has been in business for 20 years. So really, we have a backlog of about 438 million documents or files, pieces of data, whatever you want to call it, that has been created and exists. And that would take 1,664 employee years to get through that backlog. But that's okay. We can get it done in over 4 years. So it's like 5 years. We're going to tackle the backlog in 5 years. So that's processing 87 million documents in a year. No problem, because we know that a human can be 264,000 and it would require a team of 329 humans to do it in 5 years. No problem. Google tells me that the average salary in the US is $65,000 a year. No problem. We're paying 21 million per year, so 160 million over 5 years. Why would we ever do it in the US? Let's do it overseas. Google tells me that if I outsource it, then I'm paying $5,000 a year in average salary, which is at $1.6 million a year, or still over $8 million over 5 years. And that's just the stuff that we've created from yesterday till business. That's not what we're creating today and tomorrow and every day thereafter. So it was an interesting, eye-opening, there is actually a dollar amount that you can put on that. So when someone says to the IG team or the RIM team, I'll just figure it out, just go through it and, and delete the rot. That's your time and that's your cost. So of course, we know that it is impossible. We can't even have that conversation anymore that humans can do it. So technology really is the only way. And the benefits in doing that, of course, we take the human out. So we're not asking to add to their workload. We're not asking them to classify it where they kind of choose the easy answer all the time. So it reduces that human error. So it's the system is always right because it's going to classify it appropriately. Of course, with the scalability issues, it removes that because, we can process hundreds of 1,000 documents in a day. Reduces the risk because you are confident now in that the decision was made correctly and you're ready for audits. And of course, the traceability and the auditability of the decisions that were made about your documents. Of course, in that box, reduces cost, reduces time. We don't have to get into that. But it certainly does reduce we know it reduces the storage cost. And we've just kind of our little experiment down the rat hole of how much it would cost to actually manually do it. But employing a technology platform to do this really is the only way it will reduce all of those threats. Sandy, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So what we wanted to do was also kind of educate people from the benefit of our experience of having worked with so many customers and having, kind of tackled this problem so many times. We kind of have a list of what not to do. So the first one, obviously, is don't just ignore this. It does not go away. Rot is building. We are generally doubling our data stores every year and a half. So even in Jen's, beautiful mathematical model there, you would have gotten to the end of 5 years and your data would have doubled twice in that period. So you'd have had more data at the end than when you started. And that is the unfortunate truth. That's what's happening. The more we kind of unleash AI, the worse this gets. So if you think we're drowning in data now, this is nothing. And ignoring it it's not realistic, it's not ethical, it's not responsible, and it would certainly be, either sanctionable in kind of a legal setting or, penalties in a compliance setting, and nobody wants to take that on. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the number one, time to take the blindfold off. We do see a lot of number two there of folks rushing into a cleanup plan, and you hear that when the mandate is we got to get onto M365, yeah. We got to get onto the cloud, just lift and shift, and don't pay, sort it out later. We really recommend against that, and the acronym or the saying we like is don't lift and shift, but lift and sift, or really sift and then lift. We should probably turn it around.
Technically,
Jen. Yeah. In other words, pay attention to what you have. You do not need to just copy everything over. If 50% of that is rot, why don't you get rid of that first and then make the copying effort half as onerous, let alone the cost? I think Jen did a spectacular job of explaining why you don't want to do this manually.
Math doesn't lie.
Some other things maybe to look out for is this notion of over deleting or under deleting. So everybody's like over deleting? What? Come on, nobody over deletes, and that's false. The easiest way to over delete is to essentially set up deletion by time and to just simply say 90 days, out it goes. And a lot of email systems are structured this way. Come that 91st day, boom, you're out. That may have been the world's most important email or the world's most important attachment to that email, but it was 91 days and bam, out it went. So that is the quickest way to over delete, is to set up like a kind of a blind timer that just deletes stuff without considering what it actually is. And then under deleting, we're probably all guilty of that, is that kind of hanging on to it out of fear, out of lack of information, out of not knowing what to do with it. So, and those are the ones that set you up for attack vectors and litigation and, compliance malfeasance because you kept it when you shouldn't have. Another thing that we see is folks tending to think about rot remediation as a one and done project. We're going to take on this project and then it'll be done. And I am here to break your hearts one day before Valentine's Day and say, but not, it is never done. And that's the reality. And it's time to embrace that. There will always be rot. And every day that passes, something else, hits its retention period, right? So by definition, that's moving forward with time by definition. And then there's always new forms of rot. Mm-hmm. My latest one, I can't stand this, is I get essentially spam email that's going ahead and making appointments in my Teams calendar, which I did not approve or agree with. And I'm like, what the heck is that? All right, that's a new form of rot that really didn't exist a year ago. There was always going to be more, as the bad actors and the good actors are always in that arms race. All right, I talked about clear cutting. What an excellent way to label that, Jen. And then we talked about, do not migrate first, clean up second. That's just making your life ever harder. So here's our horror story. Is organizations just finding it easier, just put the whole share under legal hold. Somebody makes that call, 10 years ago. The case matter has come and gone. It's settled. Everybody's gone their separate ways. And the legal hold was never lifted because nobody ever thought to go back. And so it's sitting there under legal hold for a matter that is non-existent. Not okay. Unless you want to keep that forever. But again, it's now discoverable because you're still keeping it. It's like you're self-fulfilling this way. Don't do that. Okay, so that takes us into the best practices. Certainly what we would recommend, and this is where, obviously AutoClassification plays a big role, is to actually consider what the content is. It's not just a file and a date. It has content, it has purpose, it was created by someone, it was created for someone, and if it's been duplicated, why? Who duplicated it? Was it just a blast email that went to everybody, or everybody in the legal team saved that one document? That might mean something about that document's value. We highly recommend you involve the key stakeholders. Most people know today, your InfoGov team should consist of IT, legal, compliance, privacy. The same folks should be involved in the ROT discussion so that they're not caught off guard. Highly recommend, I can't say this one enough, that you benchmark your current processes right now. So what do I mean by that? Figure, you get a DSAR. You have to fulfill a DSAR. How long does it take you to answer the question, give me everything that former employee, there's nothing meant by that, Jen Nelson has asked for everything we have on her. How long does it take to fulfill that request? How many different repositories do you have to search? Who did the work? What was the cost of that effort? So document that now before you have tools, before you undertake the remediation effort, so that you have a benchmark to go back to and build your ROI case. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you need to respect other requirements. I know we'd all like to remove all the rot in the organization, but if it's under legal hold, you cannot. So watch out for that circumstance that we were just talking about, where legal holds get applied, but they never get lifted. It is important to actually lift them at the conclusion of matters. And that's a hard discussion to have with the legal team, because they don't really see the harm in just leaving the legal hold out there. The harm is that the data is never being deleted. One thing that we will talk about is make it easy for people. Jen was talking about the refrigerator metaphor, and getting people to change their behavior is very difficult. You can help make that easy, which is by using this notion of a tombstone. A tombstone is a bit like a shortcut on your desktop, and it's essentially a vestige of a file that used to be there. So if you are deleting the rot out of a file share, what you can do is leave like a little note, basically a tombstone that says, this file was deleted because it was identical. The actual file lives here. And if somebody clicks that little note, that little shortcut, they will go to the file. So they can still follow down the path because that's how people think when they're not used to searching or using metadata attributes to locate their content. The only tool they ever had was the file path. They can still get to where they think the file is, but it's not actually there. It's been deleted. It's a pointer, a link, a shortcut to the safe, the proper place where the file is. That's a tombstone, and it's super valuable in getting people to change their behavior. Two other points of kind of best practice. One is make sure you communicate your success. I have found that InfoGov, records manager type folks tend to be a little bit shy about promoting their success. I don't know if it's just a personality trait generally, but it's critical that you get out there and toot your own horn and say things like, we saved $5 million in hosting fees by removing rot, or we made sad we have this data breach, but we have half as much of the content to go through and analyze than we would have if we didn't do this. It's very important that you communicate that out, because that's going to drive your budget and your kind of standing in the organization for the next and the next thing that you want to do. And rot is an easy win. So take the easy win and use that to drive this last one, which is think long term. If you're going to be analyzing your content, look past just, is it a dupe? It's a dupe? Great, it's rot. You can do more than that. Does it contain sensitive data? Oh ho. Should it be under legal hold? Should it be off of legal hold? Is it something we shouldn't have had at all, that inappropriate kind of form of rot? It's very easy to kind of kill a lot of birds with one stone, particularly with rot driving.
So awesome best practices, but how do you actually do it? So how do you pick up that rot from the documents that have business value? Because we have established, obviously, that humans can't do it. So we're going to use technology, and spoiler alert, Valora can help with that. So we have a 5-step approach that we use when doing something just like this. So first, we're going to go out and connect to all those repositories. Today, we're talking about file shares. We would go into the file share in any other repository we want to connect to do a scan and an inventory of everything that's in there. So we're going to figure out what you have. And then we're going to do an intelligent analysis. So we're going to read every file to figure out what it is and kind of start pulling out those data facets. And then we'll auto-classify it based on what it's read or what it's understood the document to be. And then it will apply defensible disposition. So it's not just going to tell us where things are and what to do and, oh, you got some rot over here. It's actually going to help automate those workflows and actually get rid of it. We can delete it, we can move it, we can migrate it, we can quarantine it, whatever we need to do. And then we'll delta monitor. So just as we kind of looked at that with that human example, we're creating data every second of every day. So we're not just thinking about the backlog of rot. We want to make sure that when we're creating content today, tomorrow, and next year, that if it's possible to identify it at the time it arrives to us, like Sandy's darn spam email that ended up in our team's calendar, that we can do that. And we can do that at whatever cadence makes the most sense to the business. But I see you asking, but how does it work? Thank you for the steps, but how does it actually work? So I'll take you through how auto-classification technology usually does work. And it is a series of algorithms. It's tying rich metadata and rules together. So it is the technology making the decision. And this is kind of where those machine learning algorithms, and you'll hear, AI kind of start to play in here. Not generative AI like we think of ChatGPT, but it is the system learning about our documents. So it's the system that's going to kind of answer that question, what is this thing? And what do I do with it? And then actually do it as part of that disposition process. So what it's first going to do is it's going to open a document. So when we look at the metadata of a system generated document, think, of course, file shares, you're going to see, what is it? When was it created? Who created it? When was it last accessed? But it doesn't tell us anything about what's inside of it. So when we open it and we start to read it, we can start pulling out very significant information. As an example, created date or last modified date means nothing to me if it's a contract. I need to understand what the expiration date is, or the renewal date, or the destruction date if it's a record that needs to be retained. It's then going to apply recognition algorithms based on what it's finding in the document, determine, oh, against your records retention schedule, this is a service agreement, this is a vendor agreement, this is an employee agreement, this is a termination letter. It's going to determine that document type, and then it will apply those disposition algorithms based on that document. So if it's an employment contract, we need to mark it as confidential. We need to move it to the appropriate SharePoint folder for HR. We need to retain a copy of it for 8 years after the termination. They've just been hired, so it's just an employment contract. That date does not yet exist, but we're going to look for it. And then we'll need HR approval before we delete it, as an example. And again, those disposition algorithms don't have to be like delete it or move it or destroy it. It could be anything. Let's just tag it. Let's make a report on it. Let's move it. Let's archive it. Let's put it under or lift the legal hold. Let's migrate it to a new system. If we're moving from file shares to SharePoint, take all that really good metadata with you and save it up and migrate it up to SharePoint. And the kind of in the privacy and security world, we can also anonymize that data as well, both in the document and kind of what we see in our tool. And to give you an example of, how it's kind of doing that in a real world environment, like when you're in your file share, this is what you see, of course, which tells you nothing. So as the classification engine goes through, if it's looking for something and reading something, it's going to, this is an example of what it would look for if it was looking for something trivial. It's like, oh, these are on the watch list. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, happy birthday, congratulations. It's going to look for a date that is not recent. There's no further content. It's an image, heavy graphics. I sent it to everyone in my organization. So there's 4,000 identical copies sitting in people's inboxes. And so the system will say, okay, great, this is rot. Why is it rot? Because it has all of these things. We're okay to go ahead and delete it. An example of finding something that is obsolete, the classification engine will go through and it will again read the document, and now it's starting to pull out information. Oh, this is a contract. The effective date was 2005. There were 2 parties. There was a 1-term renewal. There's keywords in here. There's signatories. That we're going to identify that this record class is a contract. It belongs to AP and AR. We're going to keep it for expiration plus 5 years. We need authorization before we delete it when it comes to the end of its life cycle. And oh, by the way, it's confidential. So we need to kind of keep that under wraps. So we know based on the date that the effective date, the termination date, and the retention date has passed. So we're okay to delete it. When are we going to delete it? How are we going to need it? We've already established the approvals, so we can go ahead and automate those workflows. We were talking about redundant data and identical duplicates and functional duplicates. So here's a little sneak peek into Valora system Black Hat, where we can see it's pulling out all that redundant data. It's not only pulling out the identical duplicates, which we can see it's kind of this cute little icon here is identical duplicates, but it's also pulling out the functional duplicates, things that were saved from a Word to a PDF. And it will allow us to kind of assign a team captain for all those identical duplicates. Maybe, I've saved it, Sandy saved it, you saved it, but the master belongs to legal. So we can assign that master of identical duplicates, and we can also assign a master or a team captain for functional duplicates. So maybe it's the saved PDF that is the team captain. Everything else can be deleted, as an example. And when you're using an auto classification tool, you get this kind of 30,000 foot view, high level visuals of what does the rot in my system look like? So you can very quickly see that, 80% of my stuff is rot. And why is it rot? Because it's obsolete, redundant, and trivial. And it will go that third level to tell us, it's redundant because it's an identical duplicate. It's obsolete because it's past retention. And as a user, you can kind of start clicking down and looking at, it's not only a 30,000 foot view, but you can actually do things and manage and manipulate your data in it as well. So that's just a bit of a sneak peek about how using an auto classification technology tool, Valora, would help in doing that, and kind of the behind the scenes of how it's doing its analysis and its classification. Andy, do you want to take that?
Yeah. All right. So there were just a couple of things that we wanted to set you all up with. We wanted to kind of arm you because a lot of times when we talk with records managers, InfoGov folks, they get it. They understand what they need is a way to convince everyone else. So that's what we're trying to do here. When you hear storage is cheap and rot is not a problem, our suggestion is that you have a risk discussion with them. And we've given you a lot here. If you're looking for the actual math, we can give you that as well. Mm-hmm. The next kind of roadblock that you will hear is that people will resist cleaning up their data, just as Jen, with the guy like this. The real answer is to get them involved. We talked about tombstones is a great way to kind of ease the path for people. Another one is to provide them a report. That's what she's showing there. We have something in our software, it's called a rot report, that you can make a rot report on any data subset, including, Jen as custodian or Jen as author or, whatever. And then give them the report. Here's what we have. This is what we think your rot world looks like. Are you okay if this gets deleted? So involve them in the decision making. And then this is sort of an interesting gotcha because nobody really, kind of who owns the rot problem? Does records own it? Does legal own it because there's ultimately a lot of risk? Does compliance own it because it's non-compliant? Does IT own it because it's about data? And the answer is, of course, you all sort of own it. And that's helpful because that means the budgetary onus is not on any one group. It could be shared. So if each group kind of contributed budget, or if you have like a shared services organization, that's often a really good place to seek the funding for this kind of thing. So all of these groups will ultimately benefit from a rot remediation effort. So our thinking is they should contribute financially or otherwise.
Absolutely. So even after all that, when, you've got, maybe the business is on board and understands the risk and the obligation, you still have Linda in accounting who's been there for 30 years and says the big hell no one's touching my data. How do you deal with that with the people and employees? And there are a few ways that we have seen organizations deal with it. Some actually leave it. As long as they know it's there, they've already identified it through a tool. They can pull it up if they need to. Some leave the dupes as long as there's no business risk doing so. Some take the too bad, so sad approach, which is, sorry, this is corporate policy. You have your cat photos stored on corporate file shares. You're taking up 0.5 terabyte of storage and, it's a breach risk. So the tip that Sandy was mentioning here is the ability to leave that tombstone so that while you are still deleting the data that they're holding so closely and refuse to get rid of, you're at least going to leave that little sticky note to point them in the direction of where that document now lives. We have some take the gradual goodbye approach where they're just going to move all the rot over here for 3 months. Nobody's touched it. We're just going to move it over here for another 3 months. It's the gradual goodbye as it exits. So if no one's touched it, looked for it, accessed it, or otherwise tried to do anything with it for 12 months, then they press the delete button. And then there's the obsolescence. So again, they trying to educate the rest of your employees that if it exists, it's discoverable. If it exists, it's up for, it's available for a breach. If it exists, we have regulations and obligations that we have to do with this data. So it really is, regardless, I would say, of how the rest of the employees are going to take that, there's usually a path that you can come to some sort of agreement on human terms to get around the idea of people have to keep everything. So a question we often get is, so how long would something like this take to configure and get it set up? And of course, the answer is that depends. It depends on, how many systems we're looking at and the complexity of the systems. Is it on cloud? Is it prem? Is it hosted in your cloud? Or do we need to put it on prem? It depends on the goals and requirements. So, how many people are we working around the table with? Are we, tackling 1 to 2 business units or 30 at a time? And then, of course, the amount and type of data. So smaller organizations with smaller data sets, we're, pretty quick to get that up and running, but large organizations with very vast amounts, not only amounts of data, but types of data. A 1-page Word document is different than a 3,000-page recipe for a pharmaceutical, recipe. So it really depends on what we're doing. But all that to say, it's usually 3 months before you're up and you're actually looking at and interacting with and actively managing data in a tool like this. And we approach it from a phased implementation. So because it is overwhelming, it's like, well, I've only got 250 petabytes in my file share. Where do I start? We can help with that because it's overwhelming. So first we would sit down with you to figure out, what does your environment look like? What are your priorities in your organization or those data repositories that are priorities? Say that 5 times fast. And then figure out what we're going to do and what we're going to solve for. The second is physically setting up the infrastructure to support a software like this and any custom configurations to your business. Of course, we have out-of-the-box things, but not every single business is different. Some people call it a contract, some people call it an agreement. So we're going to call it what you call it internally and make sure it's set up to your business standards. And then we're going to start scanning. We start scanning pretty much right away. Usually we'll take a sample set or almost like a subset of data, usually about 30 gigs, which is like maybe 75,000 documents just to run so that you have the opportunity to say, oh yeah, this is right. Or wait, I'd really love a report on this. Or wait, if we're looking for, shoe size, can we name shoe color and start to add, information about that? So by the 6-week mark, we're usually actively scanning data sets. And then once everything's configured properly, you're happy with what you're seeing, you think you've got everything that you want to see, then we'll start release the hounds with the full scale processing on that first data set. So that usually happens around the 3-month mark, and then a full rollout. So during that time, we're looking at other repositories, we're looking at other groups or other priorities in the organization so that we know where to kind of turn our attention to next. Not to say we move repository to repository, that would be take forever. We've got we've got processors going out into different repositories doing everything all at the same time. And then of course we go back and always look for new and edited data. So I know we're just about up on the hour mark, so I just want to leave you with some final thoughts here about why you really should use some kind of technology when handling your ROT. And I'll leave this here because I can't see the Teams chat, Sandy, to see if there's any questions or
I haven't seen any come up, but if you all have questions, now's a great time to ask them. Please do.
Yeah.
At present, I don't see any, so.
Okay. Perfect. Well, I'll leave you with this then. If there are no questions, that's okay too. Feel free to email us after the fact, or you'll get a copy of this. But just some final thoughts. Why using something like this to get rid of your ROT? Of course, it's enhanced data quality and the relevance so that we know as employees, also as technologies like AI are accessing data, you're dealing with the right data. Of course, cost savings, we've already touched on that. Certainly improved compliance and risk management, understanding and being confident and auditable that your decisions and the data that you have stored is in the right spot and stored appropriately. Efficient data governance and lifecycle management, knowing that all your policies are up to date. Of course, increase productivity and operational efficiency, understanding where everything is and making sure that people have the correct access and can understand where everything is. And of course, scalability and adaptability. This is certainly not a one and done, and a technology like this will keep up with the changes to your records retention schedule, to your business obligations or your regulatory obligations. So you don't have to start from scratch, you just add it. And it just kind of builds on what's already there. So those are mine. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you everyone for attending today and for your attention. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.